The storm had barely passed when they came for me. 3 SUVs, identical and spotless, crawling down my gravel driveway like a convoy of vultures. Their windows glinted in the morning sun as if warning me, "We see everything, even your sins." I was still holding a wrench when the first one rolled to a stop. The smell of rain and fresh-cut cedar filled the air. My new black iron gate stood proud and gleaming behind me, the final touch to the property I'd poured my soul, and most of my savings, into. Then the car doors opened, and out stepped the board. At least, that's what I called them. The Homeowners Association, 3 retirees and 1 middle-aged woman with an iPad that she carried like a Bible. "Mr. Harlan," said a man in the lead, tall, gray-haired, wearing a windbreaker with the HOA logo embroidered like a badge of power. "We need to talk about that gate." I glanced back at it. It looked perfect to me. Heavy-duty steel, matte finish, motorized with remote access. I'd even matched the color to the HOA's approved neutral palette. "What about it?" I asked, wiping my hands. He gave a tight smile. "It violates a community covenant." I laughed, genuinely confused. "The covenant?" I checked. Twice. His smile didn't move. "It's not in the public copy. It's in the amended version. We'll need you to remove it within 10 days. I stared at him. "You're joking, right?" The woman with the iPad shook her head. "Page 7, Section 4. All perimeter modifications must be pre-approved by the HOA board. You didn't submit a request." "I sent an email," I said, 2 months ago. Never got a reply. She gave me a pitying look, the kind you reserve for lost pets. "Then you should have waited for approval before proceeding." I felt my pulse climb. "You people didn't even exist when I bought this land. You formed after the first 5 houses went up." "That's irrelevant," the gray-haired man said. "The association governs all properties in the development. Retroactively." Retroactively. That word hit me like a slap. They handed me a violation notice printed on thick paper, embossed with the HOA seal. 10 days to comply or face daily fines. Then, as if they hadn't just trampled over months of work and thousands of dollars, they smiled, got back in their SUVs, and drove off down the road I maintained, mind you, because the HOA hadn't bothered to pave it yet. That was the moment I decided something. They wanted a war. Fine, I'd give them one. It all started 18 months earlier. After 20 years working construction and saving every damn penny, I'd bought 5 acres on the edge of a new development called Willow Creek Estates, a half-finished luxury rural community. The developer had gone bankrupt, and the HOA formed to protect property values. Translation: they wanted to micromanage everyone. I built my house myself, poured the foundation, framed the walls, even wired the damn lights. I was proud of it. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. When I finished, I installed a gate to keep the wildlife, and, honestly, the nosy neighbors, out. The HOA had ignored me until that day. Then suddenly, I was their top priority. They fined me for non-compliant lawn length. Then for improper waste bin storage. Then again because my mailbox didn't meet aesthetic guidelines. Each letter came with that same smug tone. You agreed to these rules when you moved in. Except I hadn't. I'd bought my plot before the HOA existed, back when the developer still held the land. My title deed had no mention of an association. But when I confronted them, they just shrugged. You're within the development boundary, they said. You benefit from our maintenance and community improvements. What improvements? The potholes still swallowed tires. The communal lake had turned into a mosquito pit, and their so-called security patrol was just a retired guy named Stan in a golf cart. I tried being reasonable. I attended meetings. I showed them documents proving they had no jurisdiction over my property. They told me to seek legal clarification, knowing full well I couldn't afford to. Every letter, every condescending smile, it all added up. Then came the gate. That was a breaking point. The night after they left the violation notice, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the new iron like a challenge. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, their smirks, their rehearsed lines. Why did they care so much about one man's gate? And then it hit me. control. It wasn't about the gate. It was about power. The HOA fed on obedience, the kind that keeps neighbors quiet and rulebooks thick. My independence was a threat. But what could I do? Suing them was too expensive. Ignoring them meant endless fines. Removing the gate meant admitting defeat. Then, one sleepless night, I found something buried in the property records at the county assessor's office. The road. The winding half-mile of gravel that led into Willow Creek Estates wasn't county property. It wasn't even owned by the HOA. It was still privately registered to the original developer, a defunct company whose remaining assets were being auctioned off for back taxes. I sat there, staring at the listing on my screen, the words glowing like revelation. Parcel hash 49-071, access road and easement, Willow Creek Estates. Starting bid, $3,750. That's when the idea formed. Sharp and dangerous, like lightning in the dark. What if I bought it? What if the very road the HOA used to access their precious homes belonged to me? Could I really do that? The thought made me grin for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I called the county office. The woman on the line confirmed it. The parcel was legitimate, available for auction, and not yet claimed by the HOA. 3 days later, I wired the funds. When the deed arrived in the mail, I felt a thrill run through me. My name, Ethan Harlan, printed right there beside sole owner of access parcel hash 49-071. I drove out that evening, parked my truck by the gate, and walked the length of the gravel road. The sun dipped low, casting orange light across the cul-de-sac where the houses sat lined up in smug uniformity, beige walls, identical mailboxes, same manicured lawns. They thought they owned the place. Now they didn't even own the ground under their tires. The next HOA meeting came 2 weeks later, and I showed up early, wearing my best work shirt and the widest grin I could manage. Their expression soured the moment they saw me. "Mr. Harlan," the chair said coldly, "have you removed your gate?" I set a folder on the table. "No, but I did make a few improvements." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" I slid the deed across the table. She read the first few lines, and her face drained of color. "This is a joke," she whispered. "Oh, it's real," I said. "You're trespassing on my property every time you drive home." The room went dead silent. I could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the faint creak of someone's chair. You can't just by the road," one man finally shouted. "I did," I said, "and according to county law, I can restrict access to it at any time." Panic rippled through them. Questions flew. What about our rights? What about the easements? "You can't do that, can you?" I smiled and said nothing. Because I could. The moment I walked out of that meeting, I knew the game had changed. But revenge, real revenge, isn't about the first strike. It's about patience, about watching them squirm, planning every move, until they dig their own graves. And no, I had plans. Big ones. Because when you strip people of power, they'll do anything to get it back, and I was ready to watch them try. After all, what's a little war between neighbors? When the lawsuits came, they landed like rain on a tin roof, loud, relentless, impossible to ignore. The HOA hired a lawyer with a spotless suit and a voice like a metronome. They filed for an injunction demanding I remove the gate and restore uninterrupted community access. They argued easements, implied rights, equitable servitudes, all the words people use when they want to make other people tired until they give up. I read the complaint 3 times, then called my neighbor, Lila, who taught paralegal studies at the community college. "They've got the paperwork," she said, frowning, "but it's sloppy. They assume county ownership in places a deed doesn't support. They never recorded a claim to the road after the developer went under." Their lawyer served me in the morning, his smile perfectly calibrated for court. "Mr. Harlan," he said, "this will be over quickly." He had no idea what quickly meant to me. Court is a stage, and I decided to perform. I dressed in my old work shirt, the one with a grease stain near the cuff, and walked into the hearing with a battered folder of records, titles, county clerk stamps, the developer's bankruptcy filings, a copy of the deed that now had my name inked across it like a brand. I also brought photographs of the road, a maintenance log showing every mile I graded and every pound of gravel I'd laid down since the auction. When the judge asked why I purchased the parcel, I said plainly, because it was for sale, Your Honor, because I didn't want the people who decided my life by committee to keep telling me what I could do to my own property. There were moments in the hearing where I felt the world tilt toward me. The HOA's lawyer tried to paint me as a solitary grumbler, a man who woke up one morning and decided to punish his neighbors out of spite. I didn't deny spite. I let the word sit in the air like a coin on a table. Spite is a motive. But I had also been careful. I had registered emergency access of police and fire services, named people with legitimate living stakes in the properties as authorized users, and even posted a clear, county-approved notice about my ownership on the roadhead. I could be stubborn. I could also be lawful. The judge was annoyed at bureaucracy. This is messy, she said. I don't want to set precedent that people can buy roads and lock their neighbors out. Her glare softened when she glanced at the HOA's own records, which, to my delight, were scattered with inconsistencies and, crucially, unresolved fines that meant the HOA's Levi practices were questionable at best. She ordered an immediate pause on heavy-handed remedies and set a mediation date. Mediation was where sense and spite met. The HOA demanded I remove the gate and pay their legal fees. I demanded something more useful, recompense for the maintenance I'd already performed, and binding terms that would prevent them from issuing fines for reasonable, lawful changes to my property. They sputtered. They didn't want maintenance bills. They prospered on fees, not payments owed to contractors. The board members' faces when I presented my bookkeeping, invoices from the gravel supplier, signed receipts for ditching and culvert laying, were small, private victories. But the real turning point was publicity. Lila ran a small story in the local paper. Someone took photos of the courtroom and posted them on a neighborhood forum. Suddenly, my fight stopped being about me and became about the HOA's stewardship, their petty fines, and the way they'd been treating people who had bought lots before the association existed. People started to talk. Coffee tables heated up with conversation. One family who'd been silent for years came to my house with a pie and said, "We didn't know the bar could do that." Another neighbor, a plumber named Marco who'd been quietly paying fines, told me he'd been forced to replace vinyl siding not because it fell short of any code, but because a board member didn't like the color. Their power eroded like sandstone. The board retaliated like cornered dogs. They raised fines to astronomical level for obstruction and promised mass lanes. A thin man named Derek, the vice chair who'd argued most loudly at the meeting where I'd revealed my deed, parked one Friday and posted a stack of orange violation notices on mailboxes like God handing out judgment. He laughed as he walked away, satisfied. I took photos. I logged the time, the method, the way his phone screen glowed as he typed. Legal retaliation cost money. The HOA dipped into reserves, the very funds they claimed were reserved for improvements, and then had to explain why they'd used those funds for lawyer retainer fees that didn't produce a result. Minutes from their meetings, which had always been phrased in passive voice and clerical polish, suddenly betrayed small intimacies, donations redirected to a committee whose meetings no one could attend, an unrecorded contract between the board president and a landscaping firm owned by his cousin. I sent a carefully worded letter to the county asking for compliance audit. That letter, when it arrived, did what water does to a dry twig. It found the weak places and snapped them. Now the HOA had to answer to someone larger than me, the county auditor, the paper, and, more damningly, their own neighbors. People who had once nodded at the board pronouncements began asking for receipts. Meetings filled. Votes were requested to investigate the president's expenditures. The vice chair's boyfriend found himself on the receiving end of a flood of uncomfortable questions. Derek decided to escalate by vandalism. Petty, anonymous damage to my gate's keypad. A smear of tar across the remote sensor. I replaced the keypad with a weatherproof model and installed cameras. The camera footage was a slow-motion portrait of cowardice. Derek, under the cover of night, moving like a thief. I brought the footage to the county police. The officer who reviewed it made a note, and it became another data point in a growing dossier that said the board was not above the law. If he thought that would stop me, he misread me. The cameras did more than catch Derek. They revealed board members trespassing on other people's property, trimming hedges without permission, moving fences without paperwork. When those clips were shared at the community meeting, the room hummed like a swarm. No one liked being secretly filmed, but everyone loved being proven right. Votes to audit the HOA passed unanimously. The board's credibility bled out. Derek lost his composure and, shortly after the vice chair position, the president resigned the following month, citing health reasons. The new board that replaced them had fresh faces, less arrogance, and an appetite for transparency. They wanted the road, and the weird, ugly ward had spawned. Behind them. In the end, we struck a deal that felt like justice rather than surrender. I agreed to open the road to the community during daylight hours and to maintain a reasonable, structured maintenance agreement that would be posted publicly. The HOA agreed to retract the fines and to file corrected records with the county. They acknowledged, in writing, that my deed was legitimate and that our relationship would be governed by a contract, not by their whim. I could have demanded more. I could have exacted harsher penalties, sold the road, or charged tolls. But revenge, I'd learned, is best served with enough sugar to leave a taste of victory and not enough bitterness to sour the rest of your life. I wanted them to live with the knowledge that their power could be overturned by persistence and principle, not simply be crushed beneath it. After the settlement, Willow Creek didn't become an idol. There were still arguments about paint and hedges and whether bird feeders were decorative. But the HOA meetings changed. They began with minutes that were read and archived. The new board posted its bank statements online. The families who had been quiet started speaking. They found their voices. It turned out they'd been waiting for someone to show them the map of the terrain. On a late spring morning, months after the last legal document was signed, I stood by my gate and watched the road I owned stretch out under a clear sky. A pickup drove by, windows down, the driver waving as if nothing had happened at all. The convoy of SUVs that had once arrogantly patrolled the lane was gone. They still lived there, of course, the same beige houses, the same manicured lawns, but the thrum of control had lessened. It was a softer community now, forced to reckon with its own bureaucracy. People sometimes asked me afterward whether it had been worth the trouble. Had the sleepless nights and the legal wrangling paid off? I think about the way the older couple down the lane no longer trembled when the board called a meeting. I think about Lila's students getting interested in local governance, about Marco not having to replace siding because someone else liked the color. I think about Derek packing his things and moving away, leaving behind a mailbox that no longer needed to be watched for orange slips of doom. Revenge, I discovered, was not a flame that consumed the other. It was a light you used to guide those who had been too afraid to question authority. I hadn't crushed the HOA with malice. I'd exposed a rut that everyone else had assumed was normal. The gate stayed. It was still there, heavy and graceful, and though it bore a few scratches from the battle, it had become less a symbol of defiance and more a landmark of consequence. You could pass on it every day and remember that sometimes small, stubborn people do change the map of a place, not by destroying it, but by insisting it be honest. And if they ever decided to challenge me again, I would be ready, not armed with rage, but with records, neighbors, and the calm, slow certainty that you can buy a road and, in doing so, buy yourself back a piece of dignity.